The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in the sterile conference room as Sarah Mitchell adjusted her civilian blazer and checked her watch. She had arrived 15 minutes early for the Joint Task Force briefing, a habit ingrained from years of military precision. The room slowly filled with personnel from various agencies, FBI, DEA, local police, and several contractors she didn't recognize. Their conversations created a low hum of anticipation, mixed with skepticism about the new operation. Sarah chose a seat near the back, observing the dynamics as people filtered in. She noticed the subtle hierarchies forming, the way certain individuals commanded immediate respect while others were dismissed with barely concealed eye rolls. Her trained eye cataloged each person's posture, confidence level, and potential threat assessment, old habits from her previous life that she couldn't shake. A group of 3 men in expensive suits dominated the front row, their voices carrying across the room as they discussed their weekend golf games and stock portfolios. The tallest one, Marcus Webb, wore a Rolex that caught the light every time he gestured. His companions, Derek Santos and Michael Chen, nodded along to his stories with practiced deference. They clearly saw themselves as the intellectual elite of this operation. "I still can't believe they're bringing in outside consultants for this," Marcus said loud enough for half the room to hear. "We've been tracking these arms dealers for months. What could some fresh face possibly add to our intelligence?" Derek leaned back in his chair with a smirk. Maybe they needed someone who looks good in the photos for the press conference afterward. "You know how these publicity operations work." Sarah kept her expression neutral, though her jaw tightened slightly. She had heard variations of this conversation countless times throughout her career. The assumption that competence correlated with gender, age, or appearance was nothing new. She had learned long ago that the best response was simply to let her work speak for itself. The room's energy shifted when Director Harrison entered, followed by several senior officials Sarah recognized from her briefing materials. Harrison was a veteran FBI administrator known for his no-nonsense approach and ability to cut through bureaucratic obstacles. His presence immediately quieted the casual chatter as people straightened in their seats. "Good morning, everyone," Harrison began, his voice carrying the authority of decades in law enforcement. "You're here because you represent the best talent from your respective agencies. This operation, codenamed Iron Pipeline, targets one of the most sophisticated arms trafficking networks we've encountered in recent years." He clicked a remote, and the wall-mounted screen displayed a complex organizational chart, with photos, names, and connecting lines that resembled a spider web of criminal activity. Viktor Kozlov's organization has been flooding American streets with military-grade weapons for the past 2 years. They've evaded capture by constantly shifting their methods, routes, and personnel. Traditional approaches have failed. Sarah studied the chart intently, her mind already working through the tactical challenges presented by such a distributed network. She recognized several of the locations from her previous deployments, understanding immediately why conventional law enforcement had struggled to make progress. "That's why we're implementing a new strategy," Harrison continued. "This task force will combine the intelligence-gathering capabilities of federal agencies with the tactical expertise of our military consultants. Your mission is to infiltrate and dismantle this network from the inside." Marcus raised his hand with the confidence of someone accustomed to being heard. "Director Harrison, with all due respect, my team has been developing profiles on these targets for months. We understand their psychology, their business model, their weaknesses. Adding untested elements to our established approach seems counterproductive." Several heads nodded in agreement around the room. Sarah recognized the sentiment, experienced professionals protecting their territory from perceived outsiders. It was a natural response, but one that often hindered operational effectiveness. "I appreciate your dedication, Agent Webb," Harrison replied smoothly. "Your intelligence work has been invaluable in bringing us to this point. However, Kozlov's network has military training and equipment that requires specialized knowledge to counter effectively. That's where our consulting team leader comes in." Harrison gestured toward the back of the room. "Sarah Mitchell will be coordinating the tactical aspects of this operation. Her background in special operations and counterterrorism makes her uniquely qualified for this challenge." Sarah stood and made her way to the front, aware of the scrutinizing gazes following her movement. She was dressed professionally but simply. Navy blazer, white blouse, minimal jewelry. Nothing about her appearance suggested the decade of intense military service that had shaped her into one of the most effective operators in naval special warfare. "Thank you, Director Harrison," she said, her voice calm and measured. "I've reviewed the intelligence files, and I believe we're dealing with former military personnel who understand traditional law enforcement tactics. They've been staying ahead because they think like soldiers, not criminals." Marcus exchanged glances with his colleagues before speaking up. "Ms. Mitchell, I'm sure your research has been thorough, but understanding these people requires more than reading reports. We've been living and breathing this case. What specific experience do you have with arms trafficking networks?" The question was posed politely, but Sarah heard the underlying challenge. Marcus was establishing his dominance in the only way he knew how, by questioning her credentials in front of the group. It was a power play designed to undermine her authority before she could establish it. "My experience comes from the other side of the equation," Sarah replied evenly. "I've worked with similar networks in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria. I understand their operational security, their recruitment methods, and their logistical challenges because I've seen them succeed and fail in combat environments." Derek leaned forward with a condescending smile. "That's interesting background, but this is domestic law enforcement. The legal constraints, the civilian environment, the political considerations, it's completely different from military operations overseas." "You're absolutely right," Sarah acknowledged, "which is why I'll be relying heavily on your expertise in those areas. My role is to provide insight into the tactical aspects that traditional law enforcement might not consider." Michael Chen couldn't resist adding his perspective. "Look, we all appreciate the military's contributions, but sometimes you need finesse instead of force. These are sophisticated criminals, not insurgents hiding in caves. They respond to psychological pressure, legal leverage, financial incentives." The room had become noticeably tense as the conversation evolved into a subtle confrontation. Sarah recognized the dynamic immediately. Established professionals feeling threatened by change, defaulting to territorial protection behaviors. She had encountered similar resistance during inter-service operations and knew that forcing the issue would only create more problems. "Those are all valid points," she said, maintaining her composure despite the growing frustration she could feel building in the room. "I'm not here to replace anyone's methods. I'm here to complement them with additional perspective." Marcus seemed emboldened by the support from his colleagues. "Ms. Mitchell, with respect, perspective isn't enough when lives are on the line. This network has already killed 2 federal agents and countless civilians. We need proven expertise, not experimental approaches." The comment hung in the air like a challenge thrown down in an arena. Sarah felt the familiar sensation she had experienced countless times during her military career. Being underestimated, dismissed, tested by people who couldn't see past their own assumptions. The difference was that in combat, such misconceptions were quickly corrected by reality. In this environment, they could fester and undermine the entire operation. "I understand your concerns," Sarah replied, her voice remaining steady despite the growing tension. "Trust has to be earned, especially in high-stakes operations like this one. I'm confident that my contributions will speak for themselves as we move forward." Derek shook his head with apparent frustration. "This isn't about gender or military versus civilian. This is about practical experience with sophisticated criminal networks. These people aren't going to be impressed by your combat ribbons." The room fell silent except for the humming of the air conditioning system. Several people shifted uncomfortably in their seats, recognizing that the conversation had crossed a line into personal territory. Sarah maintained her professional demeanor, but her mind was already calculating how this resistance would affect team dynamics and operational effectiveness. Director Harrison stepped forward, his expression making it clear that he had heard enough. "Gentlemen, I appreciate passionate advocacy for your work. However, the decision to bring Miss Mitchell onto this team wasn't made lightly. Her selection was based on a comprehensive review of her qualifications and the specific requirements of this mission." Marcus wasn't ready to concede the point. "Director, we're just trying to ensure the best possible outcome. If we're going to risk our careers and lives on this operation, shouldn't we have input on team composition?" "Your input has been noted and considered," Harrison replied firmly. "Now I need everyone to focus on the mission rather than internal politics." We have 3 weeks to prepare for insertion, and every day we delay gives Kozlov more time to expand his network. Sarah returned to her seat as Harrison continued the briefing with operational timelines and resource allocations. She could feel the undercurrent of resentment from Marcus and his colleagues, but she also noticed several other team members who seemed more interested in her actual qualifications than the political maneuvering happening around them. Agent Lisa Rodriguez from the DEA caught Sarah's eye and offered a subtle nod of acknowledgement. Her expression suggested she had witnessed similar dynamics before and understood the challenges Sarah was facing. There were others, too. Younger agents who seemed more focused on the mission than on protecting their territory. As Harrison wrapped up the formal presentation and dismissed the group for individual briefings, Marcus approached Sarah with his colleagues flanking him. His smile was polite but cold, the kind of expression that preceded either an apology or an escalation. "Sarah, I hope you don't take our questions personally," he said, extending his hand for a professional handshake. "We're all on the same team here. It's just that this operation means everything to some of us. We've invested years building these cases." Sarah shook his hand firmly, meeting his gaze directly. "I understand completely, Marcus. Major operations always involve some adjustment period as teams come together. I'm confident we'll find the right working relationship." Derek stepped closer, his tone suggesting he was sharing a helpful insight rather than delivering a warning. "The thing is, Sarah, these arms dealers aren't going to be intimidated by military posturing. They're businessmen who respond to profit margins and risk assessments. You might want to consider adjusting your approach accordingly." "I appreciate the advice," Sarah replied, her voice remaining neutral despite recognizing the condescending nature of the comment. "I'm always interested in learning more effective approaches." Michael added his perspective with apparent concern for her welfare. "Also, these undercover operations can be physically and emotionally demanding. The stress level is unlike anything you experience in regular military service. We just want to make sure you're prepared for the psychological challenges." Sarah nodded thoughtfully as if considering their warning seriously. "Thank you for looking out for my well-being. I'll definitely keep those factors in mind as we proceed." The exchange continued for several more minutes, each man offering additional insights that subtly undermined Sarah's qualifications while maintaining a veneer of helpful collegiality. She responded to each comment with professional courtesy, recognizing that any defensive reaction would only confirm their assumptions about her emotional stability and professional competence. Finally, Derek delivered what seemed to be their closing argument. "Look, Sarah, we're all professionals here. We know that sometimes political considerations influence personnel decisions. If you ever feel like this assignment is outside your comfort zone, there's no shame in requesting a different role. We'd rather have you contribute in an area where you can truly excel." The offer was presented as helpful advice, but Sarah heard it clearly for what it was: an invitation to remove herself from a position they wanted to control. They had delivered their message with enough plausible deniability that any complaint would seem like oversensitivity while making their expectations crystal clear. "That's very considerate of you," Sarah responded, her tone suggesting genuine appreciation for their concern. "I'm committed to doing whatever serves the mission best. If my performance doesn't meet expectations, I'm sure Director Harrison will make any necessary adjustments." As the 3 men walked away, Sarah remained in the conference room reviewing her briefing materials. She could hear their voices in the hallway discussing dinner plans and weekend activities with the casual confidence of people who believed they had successfully established their dominance. They had no idea that their entire interaction had been observed and analyzed by someone trained to read human behavior under the most extreme circumstances imaginable. Agent Rodriguez approached as Sarah was gathering her papers. "That was quite a performance," she said quietly, glancing toward the door to ensure their conversation wouldn't be overheard. "I've seen Marcus and his crew pull that routine before. They're not bad agents, but they have some blind spots." Sarah looked up from her files with a slight smile. "Every team has its dynamics. I'm more interested in figuring out how to make this work than in fighting old battles." "That's probably the smartest approach," Lisa agreed. "But don't let them wear you down with that death by 1,000 cuts routine. They'll keep pushing until you push back or give up." "I appreciate the heads up," Sarah said, standing to leave. I have a feeling this operation is going to be challenging enough without adding internal complications. As she walked toward the parking garage, Sarah reflected on the morning's events. The tactical challenges of infiltrating Kozlov's network were significant, but manageable with proper planning and execution. The interpersonal challenges within the task force were potentially more problematic because they could undermine team cohesion at critical moments. She had faced similar situations throughout her military career, though usually with higher stakes and clearer consequences for failure. In combat, incompetent leadership or toxic team dynamics resulted in immediate and measurable outcomes. In this environment, such problems could fester for weeks or months before their impact became apparent. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Director Harrison requesting a private meeting the following morning. Sarah suspected he had witnessed more of the conference room dynamics than he had acknowledged publicly. Experienced administrators rarely missed such obvious territorial disputes, especially when they could affect mission success. That evening, Sarah reviewed the complete case files from her secure apartment outside Quantico. The intelligence picture was more complex than the morning's briefing had suggested. Kozlov's organization showed sophisticated understanding of American law enforcement capabilities and limitations. They had successfully avoided every trap set for them over the past 18 months, suggesting either exceptional operational security or inside information. The photos of crime scenes and weapons caches told a story that transcended simple profit motivation. These weren't street criminals who had stumbled into arms trafficking. The precision of their operations, the military-grade equipment they were moving, and their ability to stay ahead of federal investigators suggested former special operations personnel who understood both sides of the tactical equation. Sarah had encountered similar adversaries during her deployments in Afghanistan and Iraq. Former soldiers turned criminal often retained their training and discipline while abandoning the ethical constraints that had previously guided their actions. They were dangerous precisely because they understood the capabilities and limitations of the forces arrayed against them. As she studied the organizational charts and communication intercepts, Sarah began to see patterns that the traditional intelligence analysis had missed. The network wasn't structured like a typical criminal organization, with clear hierarchical relationships. Instead, it resembled the cellular structure used by insurgent groups to maintain operational security while maximizing flexibility. This insight had significant implications for the task force's planned approach. Traditional law enforcement tactics focused on identifying and eliminating key leadership figures, assuming that removing the head would disable the organization. Against a cellular network, such approaches often resulted in the arrest of expendable personnel, while the core leadership escaped to rebuild elsewhere. Sarah made notes in the margins of her copies, developing alternative approaches that accounted for the network's apparent military background and structure. These insights would form the basis of her recommendations to Director Harrison, regardless of how Marcus and his colleagues chose to receive them. The next morning would bring new challenges as the task force began detailed operational planning. Sarah was confident in her ability to contribute meaningfully to the mission, but she also understood that professional competence alone might not be sufficient to overcome the resistance she was facing from within the team itself. The private meeting with Director Harrison took place in his corner office, away from the political theater of the main conference rooms. Sarah arrived precisely on time, carrying her analysis from the previous evening's file review. Harrison gestured for her to take a seat across from his desk while he finished a phone call with someone at the Pentagon. "Yes, General, I understand the timeline pressures," Harrison was saying. "We'll have preliminary results within 6 weeks. No, sir, I'm confident in the team composition. Thank you, General." He hung up and turned his full attention to Sarah. The Secretary of Defense is personally interested in this operation. Kozlov's weapons have been linked to 3 terrorist incidents in Europe, and intelligence suggests he's trying to establish supply lines for domestic extremist groups. Sarah nodded, understanding immediately why her military background had become relevant to what initially appeared to be a standard criminal investigation. "That explains the cellular structure I noticed in their organization. They're not just profit-motivated criminals." "Exactly," Harrison confirmed. "Your preliminary assessment last night identified what our traditional analysis missed. These people are treating this as asymmetric warfare, not business competition." He pulled out a classified file that Sarah hadn't seen before. Viktor Kozlov served in Russian Special Forces before immigrating to the United States 15 years ago. His inner circle includes former military personnel from at least 4 different countries. They understand our tactics because they've been trained in similar methods. Sarah reviewed the additional intelligence, recognizing names and faces from various international operations. This isn't just arms trafficking. They're building capability for something larger. That's our assessment as well, Harrison agreed, which is why yesterday's territorial disputes concern me. We need seamless cooperation between all team elements, not internal power struggles that compromise operational security. The director's comment confirmed Sarah's suspicion that he had observed more of the previous day's dynamics than he had acknowledged publicly. Sir, I'm committed to making this work regardless of personal friction. The mission is too important for ego conflicts. Harrison leaned back in his chair, studying Sarah's expression. I've read your complete service record, not just the sanitized summary provided to the task force. Your last 3 years with DEVGA involved operations that make this assignment look relatively straightforward. Why did you transition to consulting work? The question touched on topics that Sarah rarely discussed, even with close friends. Her departure from naval special warfare had been voluntary but complicated, involving decisions that still affected her daily life. Personal considerations, sir. Family obligations that weren't compatible with the deployment schedule. This is the big restaurant's tone suggesting. His tone suggesting he understood there was more to the story, but wouldn't press for details. Agent Webb's concerns about your commitment level. Are they going to be a problem?
Sarah met his gaze directly.
Marcus doesn't know enough about my background to make informed assessments about my capabilities or dedication. His resistance is based on assumptions, not evidence. And that's what I figured, Harrison replied. But assumptions can be as dangerous as facts if they affect team performance. How do you plan to address the situation? By demonstrating competence rather than arguing about it, Sarah said. Results speak louder than credentials in high-stress operations. Harrison smiled for the first time during their conversation. That's the approach I was hoping you'd take. However, I want you to know that you have my full authority to make tactical decisions as you see fit. If anyone questions that authority, refer them to me directly. The rest of their meeting focused on operational details and resource allocation. Sarah learned that the task force had significant technological capabilities at their disposal, including surveillance equipment and communication intercept systems that exceeded what she had used during military deployments. The challenge would be employing these tools against adversaries who understood their capabilities and limitations. As Sarah left Harrison's office, she felt more confident about the mission parameters, but remained concerned about team dynamics. Professional disagreements could be resolved through open discussion and compromise. Personal animosity based on prejudice and territorial protection was much more difficult to overcome, especially when it was disguised as legitimate operational concerns. The task force reconvened that afternoon for detailed planning sessions. Sarah had prepared a comprehensive briefing based on her analysis of Kozlov's organizational structure, but she decided to present her findings as questions rather than conclusions. This approach would allow Marcus and his colleagues to participate in developing the insights, rather than feeling like they were being lectured by an outsider. I've been studying the communication intercepts from the past 6 months, Sarah began, projecting a timeline of intercepted messages onto the main screen. There's something interesting about the pattern of their operational security protocols. Marcus immediately engaged, leaning forward to study the data. We've analyzed those intercepts extensively. They're using standard criminal communication practices. Burner phones, coded language, irregular schedules. That's what caught my attention, Sarah replied. The irregularity isn't random. There's an underlying pattern that suggests military-style operational security. She highlighted specific dates and communication frequencies, showing how the apparent randomness actually followed a structured rotation that maximized security while maintaining coordination. This approach is designed to defeat traditional law enforcement surveillance, not casual criminal investigators. Derek studied the timeline with obvious skepticism. Even if that's true, how does it change our approach? We still need to identify their leadership structure and operational plans. It suggests they're expecting us, Sarah explained. Traditional infiltration techniques might not work because they're designed to detect and counter them. We might need to consider alternative approaches. Michael frowned at the implications. Are you suggesting that months of intelligence work has been wasted? That our planned infiltration strategy is compromised before we even begin? I'm suggesting that we might need to adapt our strategy to account for their sophistication, Sarah replied carefully. Their success against previous operations indicates they understand our standard playbook.
The room fell silent as team members absorbed the implications of Sarah's analysis.
If she was correct, their carefully developed plans might be ineffective against adversaries who anticipated their every move. This realization threatened not just the success of the current operation, but the value of all their previous investigative work. Agent Rodriguez was the first to speak up. So what do you recommend? How do we infiltrate an organization that's designed to detect infiltration? Sarah had anticipated this question and had spent considerable time developing her response. We need to approach them as professionals rather than criminals. Instead of trying to sneak in through their security, we offer them something they actually need. What could we possibly offer arms dealers that they don't already have? Marcus asked, his skepticism evident in his tone. Expertise, Sarah replied. Their organization is successful but limited by their current capabilities. If we can identify their operational constraints and offer solutions, they might invite us in themselves. Derek shook his head dismissively. That's incredibly risky. You're talking about providing real assistance to criminals. What happens if our cover gets blown? We could end up actually helping them expand their operations. Every undercover operation involves risk, Sarah acknowledged, but the alternative is continuing to chase them with techniques they've already proven they can defeat. We need to change the game instead of playing by their rules. The discussion continued for 2 hours as team members debated the merits and risks of Sarah's proposed approach. Traditional law enforcement thinking emphasized minimizing exposure and maintaining control of operational variables. Sarah's military background led her to accept higher levels of risk in exchange for greater potential rewards. Marcus eventually called for a break, ostensibly to allow people to review the new information, but Sarah suspected he wanted time to build opposition to her proposals. She watched as he gathered Derek and Michael along with several other team members in a corner of the room for what appeared to be an intense discussion. Agent Rodriguez approached Sarah during the break. You realize they're going to fight this approach regardless of its merits, right? Marcus has been developing the infiltration plan for 8 months. Changing strategies now makes him look incompetent. I'm not trying to make anyone look bad, Sarah replied. I'm trying to find an approach that actually works against these particular adversaries. I understand that, Lisa said. But politics matters in operations like this. If Marcus and his supporters actively sabotage your strategy, it won't matter how tactically sound it is. Sarah appreciated the warning, but she also understood that compromising on fundamental tactical approaches for political reasons often resulted in mission failure. What would you do in my position? Lisa considered the question carefully. Find a way to make your approach seem like a natural evolution of Marcus's plan rather than a replacement for it. Give him credit for identifying the problems that your solution addresses. When the meeting reconvened, Sarah implemented Lisa's advice by reframing her presentation. Marcus, your analysis of their communication security has identified a crucial weakness in our traditional approach. They're too sophisticated for standard infiltration techniques. Marcus straightened in his chair, suddenly more interested in hearing how his work connected to Sarah's recommendations. Go on. Your intelligence work has shown that they operate like a military unit rather than a typical criminal organization, Sarah continued. That insight suggests we need to approach them as military professionals who happen to be engaged in criminal activity. Derek remained skeptical but seemed more willing to consider the possibility. How would that work practically? We can't just walk up to arms dealers and ask to join their organization. Actually, we can, Sarah replied. But we approach them as potential business partners rather than infiltrators. We offer them services they need: technical expertise, logistical support, security consulting. Michael leaned forward with interest. You're talking about creating an entire false business identity. That's incredibly complex and resource-intensive. Less complex than continuing to fail with our current approach, Sarah pointed out. And we already have the resources. This team includes people with exactly the kind of expertise that Kozlov's organization would find valuable. The room's energy had shifted from skeptical resistance to engaged problem-solving. Team members began discussing the practical challenges of creating convincing business identities and establishing credible credentials. Marcus, seeing an opportunity to maintain his leadership role, began incorporating Sarah's strategic insights into his tactical planning. Over the following week, the task force developed a comprehensive cover identity that positioned them as former military personnel, offering specialized consulting services to organizations requiring enhanced security capabilities. Sarah's background provided authenticity for their military credentials, while Marcus's intelligence work gave them detailed knowledge of Kozlov's specific operational needs. The plan required each team member to develop and maintain detailed fictional backgrounds that would withstand scrutiny from professionally paranoid criminals. Sarah found herself working closely with people who had initially questioned her competence, as they recognized that the success of their individual covers depended on the credibility of the overall team identity. Marcus proved to be surprisingly effective at adapting to the new strategy once he understood how it built upon his previous work. His territorial concerns decreased as he realized that Sarah's approach enhanced, rather than replaced, his contributions to the operation. Derek and Michael followed his lead, gradually shifting from opposition to collaboration. However, the intensive preparation revealed new challenges that none of them had anticipated. Creating convincing business identities required them to actually perform the services they were claiming to offer. This meant that team members needed to develop real expertise in areas ranging from cybersecurity to weapons maintenance to international logistics. Sarah found herself teaching crash courses in tactical planning and operational security to team members whose law enforcement backgrounds hadn't included such training. Meanwhile, she was learning about federal regulations, legal procedures, and bureaucratic protocols that were essential for maintaining their cover identities within the civilian business world. The role reversals were instructive for everyone involved. Marcus discovered that his analytical skills translated effectively to tactical planning when he understood the military context. Sarah learned that federal investigations required patience and methodical documentation that differed significantly from the rapid decision-making cycles of combat operations. 3 weeks into their preparation, the team received intelligence that Kozlov's organization was actively seeking new partners for an expansion into the Pacific Northwest. This information provided the perfect opportunity to test their cover identities, but it also accelerated their timeline beyond what anyone had considered comfortable. Director Harrison called an emergency meeting to discuss whether they were ready to initiate contact with Kozlov's network. This opportunity might not come again for months, he explained, but I won't authorize premature contact if there's significant risk of exposure. The question forced each team member to honestly assess their preparation level and commitment to the operation. Sarah realized that this moment would define not just the mission's success, but also her working relationship with colleagues who had initially questioned her presence on the team. Marcus spoke first, his tone reflecting the professional respect that had gradually developed over the past 3 weeks. Sarah's strategic approach has given us our best chance of success against these targets. I believe we're ready to make initial contact. The endorsement from someone who had originally opposed her involvement carried significant weight with other team members. Derek and Michael voiced their agreement, followed by nods of approval from around the room. Director Harrison turned to Sarah. This was your strategy. Are you confident we can execute it successfully? Sarah met his gaze steadily. Yes, sir. The team is ready, and the opportunity is ideal. We should proceed with initial contact. As the meeting adjourned and team members began final preparations for their first operational deployment, Sarah reflected on how dramatically the dynamics had changed since that first contentious briefing. Professional competence and mutual respect had gradually overcome initial prejudices and territorial concerns. The real test, however, would come when they made contact with Kozlov's organization. Everything they had learned about each other would be put to the ultimate test, in an environment where mistakes could be fatal, and success required absolute trust between team members who had started as strangers and potential rivals. The warehouse district in Seattle looked abandoned at 3 a.m, but Sarah's trained eyes identified subtle signs of surveillance as their convoy approached the designated meeting location. Security cameras that seemed randomly placed actually provided overlapping coverage of all approach routes. Vehicles parked in seemingly natural positions offered perfect observation points for armed personnel. The entire area had been prepared as a defensive position by professionals who understood tactical principles. Sarah adjusted her earpiece and spoke quietly into her concealed microphone. Control, this is Alpha. Target location shows military-grade security preparation, multiple observation points, and overlapping fields of fire. Director Harrison's voice crackled through the encrypted communication system. Copy that, Alpha. Proceed with initial contact as planned, but maintain heightened awareness. Marcus sat in the passenger seat of their lead vehicle, reviewing the final details of their cover story one last time. Over the past month of preparation, he had transformed from a skeptical opponent into Sarah's most trusted tactical partner. His analytical mind had proven invaluable for anticipating the questions and challenges they would face during this crucial first meeting. Remember, Marcus said to the team through their shared communication channel, we're Mitchell Security Consulting, former military personnel offering specialized services to clients who need enhanced operational security. Sarah is our founder and senior partner. I'm Director of Intelligence Analysis. Everyone else has specific technical specialties that complement our overall capabilities. Derek's voice came through clearly from the second vehicle. What if they try to verify our backgrounds? We've got solid documentation, but sophisticated organizations have ways of checking that go beyond public records. That's why we built our covers around real capabilities, Sarah replied. Everything we're claiming to be able to do, we actually can do. The credentials are fictional, but the competencies are genuine. Agent Rodriguez, monitoring communications from the mobile command center, provided a final intelligence update. Intercepts from the past hour show normal communication patterns from Kozlov's security team. No indication they suspect this meeting is anything other than a legitimate business consultation. As their vehicles entered the warehouse complex, Sarah felt the familiar sensation of transitioning from preparation to execution. Her heart rate decreased rather than increased, a physiological response conditioned by years of high-stress operations. Around her, team members who had never experienced this level of operational pressure were struggling to maintain composure. Remember to breathe normally, she said quietly. These people are experts at reading stress indicators. Confidence comes from preparation, and we've prepared thoroughly. The meeting was scheduled to take place in a renovated office space within one of the larger warehouses. As they parked and approached the entrance, Sarah noted the positions of Kozlov's security personnel. They were well-trained and disciplined, but they were also following standard protective protocols that she could predict and counter if necessary. Viktor Kozlov himself met them at the entrance, a man in his 40s with the bearing of someone accustomed to command. His handshake was firm, his eye contact direct, and his overall demeanor suggested both confidence and caution. Two associates flanked him, a woman in her 30s who handled the technical aspects of his organization, and a man with obvious military bearing who served as his security chief. Miss Mitchell, Kozlov said in accented but fluent English, your reputation precedes you. Former Naval Special Warfare specialized in counter-terrorism operations in Afghanistan and Iraq. Impressive credentials for someone so young. Sarah felt a chill of concern. Kozlov's comment suggested he had conducted background research that went beyond what should have been available through normal channels. Either their cover identities were less secure than they believed, or Kozlov had access to classified military personnel records. Thank you for the kind words, Sarah replied, maintaining her composure while mentally adjusting her risk assessment. My team and I are always interested in working with professionals who understand the value of operational excellence. Kozlov gestured for them to follow him into the office space, which had been arranged for a formal business presentation. Comfortable chairs surrounded a conference table equipped with projection capabilities and secure communication equipment. The setup suggested that Kozlov took potential business relationships seriously and had resources that exceeded typical criminal organizations. Please, introduce your team, Kozlov said as they settled around the table. I prefer to understand the capabilities of everyone I might be working with. Sarah proceeded through the introductions, presenting each team member according to their established cover identities. Marcus became a former military intelligence officer, specializing in threat assessment and operational planning. Derek was presented as a cybersecurity expert with experience in protecting sensitive communications. Michael's background as a financial crimes investigator translated into expertise in secure money movement and asset protection. Throughout the introductions, Kozlov's associates took notes and asked pointed questions that tested the depth of each person's claimed expertise. Their inquiries demonstrated sophisticated understanding of the services they were supposedly seeking, confirming Sarah's assessment that this organization operated at a level far above typical criminal enterprises. "Your credentials are impressive," Kozlov said after the introductions were complete. "But credentials mean nothing without practical capability. What specific services can your organization provide that we cannot obtain elsewhere?" Sarah had anticipated this question and had prepared her response based on the intelligence gaps they had identified in Kozlov's operations. "Our unique value comes from combining military tactical expertise with civilian business capabilities. We understand how to operate in hostile environments while maintaining legal and financial security in friendly territories." She activated the projection system and displayed a presentation that demonstrated their analytical capabilities using unclassified examples from international consulting projects. The information was genuine but carefully selected to avoid revealing their true law enforcement connections. "For example," Sarah continued, "we recently helped a client establish secure supply chains through regions with active insurgent threats. The challenge was maintaining operational security against military-trained adversaries while complying with international trade regulations." Kozlov leaned forward with obvious interest. "That's exactly the kind of challenge we face. Our current operations are limited by security concerns that traditional business consultants cannot address." His associate, introduced as Natasha, spoke up for the first time. "What specific improvements could you make to our current operational security protocols?" The question was clearly a test. Answering effectively would require demonstrating knowledge of their actual operations, which could only come from detailed intelligence gathering or personal experience with similar activities. Answering incorrectly would expose them as frauds with potentially fatal consequences. Sarah chose her words carefully. "Without understanding your specific operational parameters, I can speak generally about common vulnerabilities in organizations that operate across multiple jurisdictions. Communication security, personnel reliability, financial transparency, and supply chain integrity are typical challenge areas." "Those are standard consulting talking points," Kozlov's security chief interjected. "Anyone can identify generic problem areas. We're interested in specific solutions." Marcus stepped in smoothly, supporting Sarah's approach while advancing their penetration strategy. "Mr. Kozlov, we understand your need for specific information, but we also respect operational security. Perhaps we could discuss a limited pilot project that would demonstrate our capabilities while allowing both organizations to evaluate the working relationship." This was a crucial moment in the negotiation. Kozlov's response would indicate whether their strategy of approaching him as business partners rather than infiltrators had successfully bypassed his security concerns. Kozlov exchanged glances with his associates before responding. "What kind of pilot project did you have in mind?" Sarah presented their carefully prepared proposal. "We understand you're expanding operations into new geographical areas. We could provide security assessment and logistical planning for one specific expansion, allowing you to evaluate our capabilities while limiting your exposure to our organization." The proposal was designed to give them access to Kozlov's operational plans while appearing to offer genuine value in exchange. If he accepted, they would gain intelligence about his expansion plans while positioning themselves for deeper infiltration of his organization. Natasha pulled out a tablet and began making calculations. Such a project would require access to sensitive operational information. "How do we ensure that your organization maintains appropriate security?" "The same way you ensure security with any business partner," Derek replied. "Mutual vulnerability and shared incentives. We provide references from previous clients. You provide limited access to specific operational areas. Both organizations assume manageable risk in exchange for potential long-term benefits." The negotiation continued for 2 hours as both sides evaluated the risks and benefits of collaboration. Sarah found herself genuinely impressed by Kozlov's organizational sophistication and strategic thinking. Under different circumstances, he would have been an effective ally rather than an adversary. Finally, Kozlov made his decision. Very well. We have a logistics challenge in Portland that would benefit from external expertise. If your team can provide effective solutions, we can discuss expanded collaboration. He gestured to Natasha, who produced a sealed folder containing operational details. This information does not leave this room. You have 72 hours to develop recommendations. If your proposal meets our standards, we proceed with implementation. Sarah accepted the folder, understanding that its contents would provide the task force with invaluable intelligence about Kozlov's operations. However, she also realized that they were now committed to providing genuine assistance to criminal activities, crossing ethical lines that could complicate their legal case if the operation was discovered. As they prepared to leave, Kozlov made a comment that sent chills through Sarah's spine. Miss Mitchell, I should mention that we've had problems with federal law enforcement attempting to infiltrate our organization. Our security measures are designed to detect and eliminate such threats permanently. The warning was delivered with a casual tone that made it even more menacing. Kozlov was letting them know that he suspected they might be more than they appeared, while also making clear what would happen if his suspicions proved correct. I understand completely, Sarah replied. In our line of work, we encounter similar security challenges from government agencies that don't appreciate private sector involvement in sensitive areas. The response was deliberately ambiguous, allowing Kozlov to interpret it as either confirmation of their criminal intentions or acknowledgement of legitimate business concerns about government interference. As they left the warehouse and returned to their vehicles, Sarah felt the weight of the risks they had just accepted. The folder in her briefcase contained information that could break open Kozlov's entire organization, but obtaining it had required commitments that put them deeper into legal and ethical gray areas. Marcus's voice came through her earpiece as they drove away. Alpha, that went better than expected, but we're committed now. If Kozlov discovers our real identities, we won't be walking away from the next meeting. Understood, Sarah replied. But we've achieved deeper penetration than any previous operation. The intelligence we just obtained will justify the increased risk. Back at the Task Force Command Center, Director Harrison reviewed the recording of the meeting with a mixture of satisfaction and concern. Sarah's team had successfully established contact with Kozlov's organization, but they had also committed to providing assistance that crossed legal boundaries. How do we handle the ethical implications? Agent Rodriguez asked during their debrief. We're now actively helping criminals expand their operations. Harrison's expression was grim but determined. We document everything and ensure that our assistance doesn't actually enable criminal activity. The information we provide will be accurate, but limited, designed to advance the investigation rather than genuinely help their operations. Sarah understood the moral complexity of their situation, but she also recognized that it represented their best opportunity to dismantle a network that had eluded capture for over 2 years. Sir, we knew going in that this approach would require compromises. The question is whether those compromises are justified by the potential results. As they began analyzing the operational intelligence from the folder, Sarah reflected on how dramatically her relationship with the task force had evolved. The same people who had initially questioned her competence were now looking to her for leadership in an operation that had exceeded everyone's expectations for both risk and potential reward. The next 72 hours would determine whether their strategy ultimately succeeded in bringing down Kozlov's organization or resulted in their own exposure and elimination. Either way, Sarah knew that the professional relationships forged during this operation would be tested under circumstances that would reveal everyone's true character and capabilities. The operation reached its climax 6 weeks later in an abandoned industrial complex outside Portland. Sarah crouched behind concrete barriers, coordinating the movements of 12 federal agents through encrypted communications, while Kozlov's organization prepared to receive what they believed was a massive weapons shipment. The months of careful infiltration had led to this moment when Kozlov would personally oversee the largest arms transaction in his network's history. Alpha Team, hold position, Sarah whispered into her microphone. Target vehicles approaching from the southeast. Count 4 trucks, estimated 20 personnel. Marcus's voice crackled through her earpiece from his observation position on an adjacent building. Confirmed visual on Kozlov in the lead vehicle. This is our chance to take down the entire leadership structure. The irony wasn't lost on Sarah that Marcus had become her most reliable tactical partner. the same man who had questioned her competence during that first contentious meeting months earlier. Their professional relationship had evolved through shared risks and mutual respect earned under the most demanding circumstances imaginable. Director Harrison's voice came through the command channel from the mobile control center positioned a mile away. All teams, remember that Kozlov's people are heavily armed and trained. We need clean arrests with maximum intelligence recovery. No heroics. Sarah acknowledged the instruction while mentally calculating the tactical variables that would determine success or failure in the next few minutes. Kozlov's security team included former military personnel who understood urban combat principles. The industrial setting provided numerous defensive positions and potential escape routes. Most importantly, any indication that they were facing federal agents rather than rival criminals would result in a firefight that could claim multiple lives. Over the past 6 weeks, Sarah's team had gradually worked their way deeper into Kozlov's organization by successfully completing 3 smaller projects that demonstrated their value as business partners. Each operation had provided additional intelligence about personnel, procedures, and capabilities while building the trust necessary for tonight's culminating transaction. The psychological pressure had been enormous for team members who were accustomed to the clear moral boundaries of traditional law enforcement. They had been required to provide genuine assistance to criminal activities while carefully limiting their contributions to avoid actual harm to innocent people. The ethical complexity had tested everyone's resolve and professional judgment. Derek's voice interrupted her tactical calculations. "Sarah, we've got a problem. Natasha just arrived with a vehicle we haven't seen before. Could be additional security, or could be federal surveillance." Through her scope, Sarah observed Kozlov's technical specialist emerging from a van equipped with sophisticated electronic equipment. If Natasha was conducting counter-surveillance sweeps, she might detect the task force's communication intercepts and tracking devices that had been carefully positioned around the complex. "Copy that," Sarah replied. "All teams maintain radio silence until further notice. Switch to predetermined visual signals only." The decision to abandon electronic communications significantly complicated their coordination, but it was necessary to avoid detection by Kozlov's security measures. Sarah had trained for such contingencies during her military service, but most of her team members had never operated under such restrictive conditions. She moved carefully through the shadows toward Marcus's position, using hand signals to communicate with team members she encountered along the way. The months of preparation and training were paying off as federal agents who had initially struggled with military-style tactics now moved with competence and confidence through hostile territory. "Status report," Sarah whispered as she reached Marcus's observation point. "Kozlov's people are conducting systematic security sweeps," Marcus replied. "They're more paranoid than usual, which could mean they suspect something, or they're just being extra careful with a major transaction." Sarah studied the target area through her binoculars, noting the positions of Kozlov's security personnel and identifying potential vulnerabilities in their defensive setup. "We need to initiate contact before they complete their security preparations. Once they're fully established, our advantage disappears." The original plan called for allowing Kozlov's organization to begin the weapons transfer before revealing the task force's presence. This approach would provide definitive evidence of criminal activity while catching the targets in a compromising position. However, their enhanced security measures threatened to detect the federal presence before the transaction could begin. Sarah made the tactical decision to accelerate their timeline, accepting increased risk in exchange for maintaining operational initiative. She activated a small handheld device that sent coded light signals to team leaders positioned around the complex. Within minutes, federal agents began moving toward their assigned assault positions while maintaining the appearance of criminal associates arriving for the planned transaction. The deception required precise timing and coordination, as any premature revelation of their true identity would result in disaster. Agent Rodriguez's voice came through Sarah's earpiece as she approached the main building. "Control 2 Alpha. We've identified an additional security team on the north perimeter. Recommend adjusting approach routes to avoid detection." Sarah acknowledged the information and revised her tactical plan, directing team members away from the newly discovered threat while maintaining pressure on Kozlov's primary position. The ability to adapt quickly to changing conditions had been crucial throughout the operation, and it would determine their success in these final moments. As she approached the main entrance to the warehouse where the transaction was scheduled to take place, Sarah felt the familiar calm that descended during critical moments of high-risk operations. Years of combat experience had taught her to function effectively under extreme stress, processing multiple information streams, while maintaining awareness of tactical opportunities and threats. Kozlov greeted her at the entrance with apparent warmth, though Sarah detected increased tension in his body language. Mitchell, right on schedule. I trust your team is prepared for our largest collaboration yet? Absolutely, Sarah replied, matching his professional demeanor while scanning for signs that their cover had been compromised. My people are positioned to ensure smooth execution of all operational phases. The conversation continued with coded references to the weapons transaction, while both sides maneuvered for tactical advantage. Sarah realized that Kozlov suspected something was wrong, but hadn't yet identified the specific threat. His professional paranoia was working in their favor by preventing him from taking decisive action. Shall we proceed to the main facility? Kozlov asked, gesturing toward the warehouse interior where the weapons were supposedly stored. Sarah nodded and followed him inside, knowing that this moment would determine whether months of careful preparation resulted in success or catastrophic failure. Behind her, team members moved into final positions while maintaining their cover identities as criminal associates. The warehouse interior had been prepared as a staging area for the weapons transaction, with tables arranged for displaying merchandise and vehicles positioned for rapid loading and departure. However, Sarah's trained eye immediately identified defensive preparations that suggested Kozlov was expecting trouble. Before we begin, Kozlov said, his tone becoming more serious, I need to address a security concern that has come to my attention. Sarah felt her pulse increase despite her training, recognizing that their operation had reached its most dangerous moment. What kind of security concern? Kozlov signaled to his security chief, who emerged from behind a stack of shipping containers accompanied by two armed men. We've detected electronic surveillance equipment in the area. Either we're being monitored by law enforcement, or our business partners have brought uninvited guests. The accusation hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah realized that their months of careful preparation had brought them to a moment where everything depended on her ability to maintain their cover story under direct confrontation from suspicious criminals who had the power to eliminate them immediately. That's concerning, Sarah replied, her voice remaining steady despite the mortal danger she now faced. My organization takes security very seriously. If there's been a breach, we need to identify the source immediately. Her response demonstrated confidence rather than defensiveness, suggesting that she shared Kozlov's concerns rather than being responsible for them. The psychological misdirection bought them precious seconds while Kozlov evaluated whether she was a threat or an ally facing a common problem. Marcus's voice crackled through her concealed earpiece so quietly that only she could hear it. Federal backup teams are in position. Give the signal when you're ready. Sarah faced a critical decision. She could maintain their cover and hope to gather additional intelligence, or she could initiate the planned takedown before their situation deteriorated further. Either choice involved significant risks with potentially fatal consequences for her team. Victor, she said, making her decision, if we're dealing with law enforcement surveillance, we need to handle this professionally. My people have experience with federal operations. The statement was deliberately ambiguous, allowing Kozlov to interpret it as either criminal experience evading law enforcement or legitimate business experience dealing with government regulations. However, it also positioned her to reveal their true identity if the situation required immediate action. Kozlov studied her expression carefully before responding. Perhaps your people should demonstrate that experience now. Sarah recognized that he was testing her reaction to determine whether she was genuinely who she claimed to be or was actually a federal agent attempting to infiltrate his organization. Her response in the next few seconds would determine whether they proceeded with the planned operation or whether the situation escalated into armed confrontation. She reached slowly into her jacket and withdrew her concealed service weapon, but instead of pointing it at Kozlov, she held it in a non-threatening position while speaking into her hidden microphone loud enough for everyone to hear. All federal agents, this is Sarah Mitchell, Naval Special Warfare Command, badge number 7749. You are surrounded by FBI, DEA, and Federal Task Force personnel. Drop your weapons and surrender immediately. The revelation transformed the warehouse into chaos as both sides processed the sudden shift from business negotiation to law enforcement operation. Kozlov's expression changed from suspicion to fury as he realized the extent to which his organization had been penetrated and deceived. However, instead of immediate surrender, Kozlov's security team responded with the disciplined tactics of former military personnel facing a tactical situation. They moved quickly to defensive positions while assessing their options for resistance or escape. "You've made a serious mistake," Kozlov said, his voice cold with controlled anger. "My organization doesn't surrender to anyone." Sarah found herself in the position she had trained for throughout her military career. Outnumbered in hostile territory, with responsibility for the lives of her team members and the success of a critical mission. The months of careful preparation and relationship building had led to this moment where everything would be decided by tactical competence and professional courage. "Victor, you're surrounded by federal agents with military training and superior numbers," she replied calmly. "Your people are professionals who understand tactical realities. Don't force them to die for a fight you cannot win." The standoff continued for several tense minutes as both sides calculated their options. Sarah could hear movement throughout the warehouse as federal agents moved into assault positions, while Kozlov's people prepared defensive positions. The outcome would depend on whether professional military training would overcome criminal desperation. Finally, Natasha broke the deadlock by dropping her weapon and raising her hands. "Victor, she's right. We've been outmaneuvered. Fighting will only get our people killed." Her surrender triggered a domino effect as other members of Kozlov's organization recognized the futility of resistance. Within minutes, the entire leadership structure that had eluded federal law enforcement for years was in custody without a single shot being fired. As handcuffs were applied and Miranda rights were read, Sarah reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this successful conclusion. The operation had required her to overcome initial skepticism from teammates, navigate complex ethical challenges, and ultimately demonstrate that unconventional approaches could succeed where traditional methods had failed. Marcus approached as the prisoners were being processed, his expression reflecting both relief and professional admiration. "Sarah, I owe you an apology for my initial reaction to your involvement in this operation. Your strategy and leadership made the difference between success and failure." "We all made the difference," Sarah replied. "This operation succeeded because everyone was willing to adapt and grow beyond their initial assumptions about each other and about the challenges we faced." Director Harrison arrived as the evidence collection was beginning, his expression reflecting satisfaction with the operation's outcome and the professional relationships that had been forged during its execution. "Outstanding work, everyone. This organization's capture will prevent weapons from reaching terrorist groups and domestic extremists for years to come." As Sarah watched federal agents processing the largest arms trafficking case in recent history, she understood that the operation's success extended beyond the immediate law enforcement victory. The team members who had initially questioned her competence had developed into trusted colleagues who could work effectively in high-stress environments requiring both tactical expertise and ethical judgment. The humiliation she had experienced during those first contentious meetings had been transformed into mutual respect earned through shared risks and demonstrated competence under extreme circumstances. More importantly, the operation had proven that diverse perspectives and unconventional approaches could overcome challenges that traditional methods couldn't address. In the weeks that followed, as Kozlov's organization was dismantled and prosecutions were prepared, Sarah received commendations from federal law enforcement agencies and requests for consultation on similar operations. However, the most meaningful recognition came from teammates who had initially doubted her capabilities but had learned to trust her leadership when lives were on the line. The operation had tested not just tactical skills and professional competence, but also the ability to build effective working relationships under pressure, while maintaining ethical standards in morally complex situations. Sarah's success in meeting these challenges established her reputation as someone who could be trusted with the most demanding assignments in federal law enforcement.